All yours, Jamie. Thanks very much.
All right, no worries. Thank you. All right. All right. Are we on? There we go. Right. Here we go. Okay, just as a quick recap, we've gone through taking it up really after the Persian Empire. So you've got the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, and then in fact, well, let me just, yeah. And then the Maccabees was where we started, really, with the Maccabean revolt after Alexander, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, and then the Maccabees. And then that was the first one, really. Has the Maccabees started off and went off into the hills, created a sort of a fighting force, went back, took over parts of Judea and Jerusalem, and then the Hasmonean dynasty that then followed. That was the first few parts. I won't go too much into detail on those now, but it's really just that flow of history. The Maccabees in particular are very interesting because he sort of stood up against the Greeks and said, anyone for the Torah and for the covenant of God, follow me. And it was really fighting against the Hellenistic rulers of the time. So just to put us in the picture again, we've got the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemies. There was a brother at camp, wasn't he? I was trying to pronounce the Ptolemies, the Greek brother from West London. And so it's just to put it in perspective that we're just talking about this land bridge. It's often called the land bridge in various circles, and it's the bridge between Asia, Africa, and Europe. If you want to go to any one, and that's why it's even today, I think it's key really to movements around three continents. So tonight, really, what I want to have a look at is Herod. And to get up to this point, it is interesting, but this really would hopefully will stand alone on its own as well. And before I start, just want to thank you for listening and letting me indulge myself in this as well for a short time here. So Antiochus IV was in one of the previous ones, was one of the kings that of the Seleucids that went into the temple, slaughtered a pig on the altar, and really sort of was the main character there. And this time we're going to want to introduce Herod the Great, or I prefer his Hebrew name, which is Hordos. Sounds a bit more wicked, Hordos. And a movie could be made about him, really, which is stranger than fiction. He's a complex character. Reading about his life brings the Proverbs to life, particularly around bribery, deceit, war, violence, romance, sex, intrigue, all with a dramatic ending. The Romans chose well from a worldly perspective. He was loyal to them. He was appointed king of the Jews, and he reigned for 33 years. He was also a major builder. His career was tumultuous. Many believe him to be one of the most influential and colourful figures of the political world of the early Roman Empire. And where we started these presentations was to see how we go from the Old Testament of Malachi all the way through to the New Testament and those changes, and where did the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as we looked at last time a little bit, the Sanhedrin, of how they came about. And Herod really is a key backdrop before we get to the Gospels. And that's why, even though he's only mentioned once in the Gospels, really, it's that world is really the world of Jesus and the disciples that Hordos really sort of started to bring together. Decided to end in around 4 BC on this presentation, just due to the amount of detail that the backdrop really of this presentation hopefully gives on the New Testament. So we'll go through. As that picture comes, I think the pictures might be a bit delayed. Oh, there we go. I've lost my notes now, sorry. Yep, there you go. So Herod was quasi-Jewish. He was from forced conversion under Hyrcanus. We saw that in the last presentation, how certain areas were forced into becoming Jews. His father was called Antipater, and he was an Idi Amin advisor to the Jewish king Hyrcanus. And Idi Amin Jews were viewed in Judea with suspicion because they were forced into becoming Jews. They were looked at in that regard, even 250 years later, and possibly even until today, they're viewed with suspicion, arguably. Herod was further disadvantaged because his mother was an Arab, from a Nabatean from the southeast. So he didn't have it all going for him, but the violent take it by force, as it says in the scriptures. So our sources for this particular presentation is really Josephus. He began as an upper-class priest from Jerusalem. Give you a little bit of a background on him from last time. But he underwent and saw great changes in his lifetime from the mid-1st century. So he's after the time of Herod here, and refers to the books no longer with us. He ended his life as a literary figure in the imperial court in Rome. So he saw both sides of the equation, if you like. Views of Josephus have sort of toed and froed, ebbed and flowed over the years, but it's probably a bit more positive at the moment from things that I've read. He's often berated, but he did demonstrate bravery in writing praise of the Jews and Judaism whilst he was in Rome. Appian, he wrote a treatise called Against the Jews, and that left its mark on or many other Roman writers such as Tacitus, who then wrote that the reason why the Jews were expelled, or the Hebrews were expelled from Egypt, because they were detested by the gods. He wrote that they allegedly murdered a Greek annually. The blood libels, nothing new under the sun. He called the Jews evil incarnate. He said the Sabbath rest is because they're lazy, and things that have been repeated throughout history. Josephus then wrote against Appian in defense of the Jews. Much of the presentation really is taken from his work called The Life of Herod. John and Kat in our fellowship kindly bought me a book when they were away called The Life of Herod, which I had this presentation done, and they delayed the presentation by about 3 months because I had to read through it and just challenge quite a lot of the things that I had written down. So that was quite good. And Nicholas of Damascus, he was a non-Jew, and he was the main source for Josephus. He was attracted by wealth and glamour of Herod. He was apparently a prodigious writer on philosophical works, tragedies, comedies, history. He wrote a full history, traced the story of the world from ancient times, becoming more detailed in his own time. He was what people would call a wandering Greek intellectual, offering his services whenever the opportunity arose, and he was by no means alone in this. It's written in some places. I suppose there's many similar characters around on YouTube today and various places, sort of guns for hire, if you like, or intellectuals for hire. He personally loyal to Herod, and he wrote well of him. You wouldn't want to write anything else if you were in his court, I imagine. So following Pompey's conquest, 62 BC, this is where we left it last time. Herod's father, Antipatris, helped Julius Caesar in numerous battles and was rewarded with the position governor of Judea. For an example, Hyrcanus described Hyrcanus the king as dull-witted and indolent. And what Antipater did, he formed friendships with Rome by asking the king. He said, what you need to do is send them gifts to Rome. But what he did was he repackaged them like under the Christmas tree. He took the king's labels off and he labeled them as his own gifts to Rome. So he built up quite a relationship with the Romans. And then in 44 BC, Julius Caesar was murdered, and that created a big vacuum in the Middle East. His father was poisoned in 43 BC. Herod then had the perpetrator, which is called Malchus, killed. But it's not as easy as you think in that sense, or not as easy, as straightforward, because he was subject to Rome. So he was under restrictions, and he had to do things very craftily and sneakily. as we'll see as we go through. And he had to give account for his actions. The area is volatile, and there are many rumors flying around from Rome, from Jerusalem, from Judea, all up and down the place. So then Brutus and Cassius were then defeated in 42 BC, and this is when Mark Antony then took over. So around this time, I'll just give you a little story of Herod. Around this time, for the murder of Malchus, Herod stood trial before the Sanhedrin, and he took bodyguards with him, enough for protection, but not too many to be seen as taking over. And the governor of Syria pressured the king Hyrcanus to acquit Herod with threats, but apparently Hyrcanus looked at him like a son. And at the trial, there's a small story there. At the trial, no one dared speak up from the Sanhedrin. They just kept quiet, apart from a guy called Samius. And he says, look at his appearance. He's a man accused of murder. He should be dressed in black and pleading for his life. But Herod is here dressed in fine apparel with purple robes. He's got his hair set nicely. He's got an army around him. And he says, I don't blame Herod for putting his interests above the law. But he says to the Sanhedrin, he said, I blame you and the king for allowing him to act like this. So he said, and what he said before all of them, he said, Herod intends to kill you all and the king, all of us. And jumping slightly ahead, that prophecy came true, because Herod later on killed all of the Sanhedrin, killed King Hyrcanus, but he saved this guy called Samius because he said he was a man of integrity who spoke up, which was quite interesting. So in 40 BC, Mark Antony confirmed Herod as governor of Judea, and his brother Physalis as governor of Judea. So Galilee and Judea, sorry, they took over. Now, not all the Hasmoneans were happy with this, and many of them looked to the Parthians, if you remember those up in the north, the northeast. So Physalis lost his life. Herod fled. He didn't fall for the trap that the Parthians set for them. I think they invited him to dinner, and Herod saw the trap. And Antigonus cut off the ears of Hyrcanus the king and disqualified him from the office of the high priest. In Luke 22, and one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Jesus healed him, allowing him to serve again in that regard. Donald Trump recently, it was interesting that he was shot in the ear. Niall Ferguson, the historian, he states that, he said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So first campaign. So Herod then, if you see on the last one, Herod in the bottom right, he heads off to Rome. And while he's in Rome, he's confirmed by the Senate as King of the Jews. And he returns up in the northwest, and he secured all the coastal plain, Joppa, and returned to Masada, where he'd left 800 of his supporters and family. Unable to take Jerusalem, there was a rare snowfall of in 38, 39, if anyone remembers it, in Judea. And so he moved all his family up into the Galilee in the north. And then he took resistance fighters in the Sea of Galilee, and Mark Antony, and he helped fight with the Romans up in the Euphrates in the northeast area. The reason why I put this picture of Mark Antony and Cleopatra's relationship is Herod really was caught in the middle of these two. Mark Antony got on well with, Cleopatra hated him, and he's in the middle of them. Cleopatra wanted quite a bit of the land in the south, and that's quite an interesting part of the story in itself. I'm not looking to cover every aspect of all this, but maybe hopefully just to ignite, a bit of interest for you to maybe have a look at through the Gospels again and some of the other writings. So then he has a second campaign. He defeats the Parthians with Mark Antony, and Herod is given 2 Roman legions to command. And with the Roman legions, he's then able to capture Judea, Jericho, and siege, and he took Jerusalem back. Took control from the outside in rather than from the inside out, with the help of Rome. So Herod convinced Antony to put Antiochus to death, and that's when the Hasmoneans ceased, 126 years after it was first set up. Josephus counting from the purge of the temple in 163 BC to Herod's conquest in 37 BC. Also, as well, what was significant about this was that he put an end to the old Jewish regime that was assumed rule. So all the Sanhedrin and the councils that was set up really against the Hellenization and the Greek influences and the Roman influences, that was all gone. He just swept the whole lot away in one go. So even though it had gone quite away from, it was disconnected from the Old Testament, here it's completely gone. So by the time we get to Jesus, it's even further away from anything that you could recognize as being Old Testament writings. That's why Jesus says, go and read the Old Testament, because you've long forgotten that. So Jewish element with the king's friends and entourage, and the king's opinion was decisive. And it's a warning really on taking on the world's patterns. There's no continuity between the Sanhedrin and the previous Jewish body in tradition or character. It's just like the boiling frog, where the temperature's turned up until eventually it boils over. So this is Herod's building or area now. With the exception of David and Solomon, Herod controlled more territory than any other before him that we've seen in the other previous sections. Large areas of the east of the Sea of Galilee, Golan, Bethany, and beyond the Jordan, Perea, Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. So his politically is on the up, but his domestic life, as we'll see, is well and truly on the way down. He purges all the opposition. He later strengthened his ties to Hyrcanus, Romans by marriage really, to the granddaughter Mariam. There was just one slight problem. Herod was already married to Doris, and their son was called Antipater, who we'll see as we go through. He comes up more towards the end. So Marianne also happened to be the niece of Antiochus, the revolutionary who staged a revolt against Hyrcanus, and Antigonus, with support from the Parthian Empire, overthrew him, and he ruled for 3 years. And then the two children were Aristobulus and Alexander. Had 2 children, Aristobulus and Mariam, the wife of Herod. It can all get quite complicated, particularly with Herod. So next one is Alexander was upset that her son didn't get the high priesthood, and she asked Cleopatra to help via a traveling musician. Let's say all the intrigue. She sent a musician up there. Antony's friend had somebody in the area called Delius, and he saw the beauty of the children. So what he did, he was crafty as well. What he did was he had a portrait painted of the 2 children, and he sent them to Mark Antony, the Roman emperor, because he knew that the Roman emperor would ask for them to be sent. But he didn't ask for the daughter for 2 reasons. One, she was married to Herod, and the other reason Josephus gives is that it would have also made Cleopatra jealous. But what he did do, he said, send the boy. He said, send the boy for my pleasure. And Herod stood up for him, and he said, I can't let him go because it'll cause a civil war. And then he made his son high priest. However, Herod then had him killed in play swimming. So he got a few guys to go swimming with him, started messing around, and then drowned him. And then Herod then mourned and cried at the funeral. But Alexander planned to escape in a coffin after fainting death when having arranged it with Cleopatra. But she was found out, and then he had him put to death. Also as well going on at this time is war with the Nabateans. No one really knows how many children Herod had, but it's estimated he had at least 14 children by 8 of his 10 wives. Lots of them are not recorded, particularly the daughters at that time as well. rumours were spread about his wife whilst he was away in Rome, and suspicions grew, though it wasn't conclusive. He becomes more and more paranoid throughout his life as well. One of the strange stories, which I found not from Josephus, but some just general sort of hearsay, if you like, was that Marianne I, he had her preserved in honey after her death. Marianne was executed on her husband's orders, but Herod found her too beautiful to be buried and apparently preserved the body for 7 years. Another version of the story says it was a Hasmonean princess who threw herself from the roof rather than to marry Herod. Sure, it's in Josephus as well that Herod was found talking to his wife afterwards as well, because he'd regretted what he'd done. So he may have been Herod the Great to his to many, but his name has been used for one of the world's greatest traps, called the Herod clause in contracts. Hidden clauses really are assigned even in modern times to Herod. Apparently, a 2014 study by F-Secure showed that people would give up the firstborn children in exchange for free Wi-Fi when they'd set it out doing various tests, or because they failed to read the fine print. And that's associated with the type of deception that came from Herod. Mark Antony and Cleopatra were defeated by Octavian. Augustus Caesar in 31 BC committed suicide together in Egypt. This was a problem for Herod, who, if you remember, is friends with Mark Antony. He rules Rome. Octavian then defeats Mark Antony. So Herod, being Herod, this is quite a bold thing, really. What he did was, instead of hiding away or running away, he went to Rome and he stood before Octavian and he said, I've been loyal and trusted friend to you. I've been a loyal and a trusted friend to Mark Antony all these years. He said, and just as I've been a friend to him, I'll be a friend to you. And Octavian took him at his word, and he became friends with Augustus. So it's quite a bold move, really, to head to Rome and sort of he didn't try to hide anything, or he just said, look, this is how it is. And Augustus took him on, and they became friends after that. But his troubles really weren't with Rome. His troubles were much closer to home, as we've seen and we will see. So just a few of his building projects. You can see all these red dots. He was quite prolific when it came to that. Herod had a huge ego, and he wasn't able to conquer like other kings of old and go and conquer lands like Alexander the Great, because anywhere he went, he would have been fighting against the Romans. So his ambition is really demonstrated in his building projects, and particularly the fortresses in the wilderness. There were also many considered just to keep tabs on his own people and his borders, because he operated a stern regime of suppression and military force, often used mercenaries and police espionage and secret tunnels from the temple that he had for his own escape. He was generous to Rome and to others, being even merciful at times with gifts and various things, but the price was really paid by his own people, who were heavily taxed and subjugated. He was successful in that he wasn't assassinated, but 10 men did try and put a cohort together, and they were captured through his network, and they were tortured and killed. He had there was some 6,000 Pharisees who refused to take the oath of loyalty towards him, and with some in close contact to his brother, uttered prophecies against him. So the Pharisees have got a little bit of a history of going against, the perceived rulers of the day as well. Herodian Fortress, I won't go into too much detail on these. We can just see that they are very, they're huge places. This one is quite a bit, I think it was 1,300 feet above sea level, 30 meters. So, huge place here. Come back to this one at the end. Masada, this is the one, 1,300 feet above the Dead Sea. And Masada means a mountain fortress where you had water up there, swimming pools, all that kind of thing. three-tiered palace complex. In passing, he was also favourable to the Essenes due to a prophecy that one of them gave about that when he was unknown, that he would reign as a king. So he always looked favourably upon them. And despite being dead for more than 2,000 years, Herod continues to leave his mark on the Judean landscape. Mount Masada was excavated in 1963, and they found seeds there. There was a cache of seeds. In 2005, one of the seeds was planted and it blossomed into a Judean date palm species, which had been considered extinct for more than 800 years. One of his other famous places was Caesarea. He built a palace out into the sea, swimming pool carved out of the rock, surrounded by pillars and rooms. It's where Paul was likely to have been kept a prisoner in Acts 25, further down, not too far away from this. That just gives an idea of the plan view. A view of the breakwater of Caesarea, part of the original route. This was the amphitheatre there. Foreigners were amazed because of the expense that he put into the games, and entranced by danger of the spectacle. But to the native Jews, it was flagrant violation of the customs. To throw people to beasts for entertainment and changing the customs is an abomination. But to demonstrate his Greco-Roman allegiances, if you like, he agreed to serve as the president of the Olympic Games in 12 BCE. His financial support of the Games ensured that they would continue at a time when their popularity and finances were on the wane. No need to show an image of the recent 2024 opening ceremony in Paris, but it's probably something along the lines that you maybe have seen in ancient Greece. A man, he had many enemies and he needed security. His personal bodyguard comprised of 2,000 men from all over the world, Germanic warriors, Thracians, even a team of Celtic warriors, Celtic soldiers, apparently who were once part of Cleopatra's army. So we'll just have a flick through some of his, this one, Herodian architecture, particular style of the turrets, etc., which we see then around the world. That was a key of his building design. Jericho, we could go through. Just these are all pretty well known. Jerusalem and his influence upon Jerusalem, and then we get narrower and narrower into the Temple Mount. Herod the Great looking west here, steps leading up to the temple entrance. Herod's Temple, 20 BC. The inner courts, temple accessible by 10 gates through which only the Jews could enter. Inside there were several chambers, courtyards where sacrifices were made, and at one end the holy place. Again, these are all, look into these on their own. Quite remarkable. Court of the Gentiles was essentially an open-air bazaar where guests to Jerusalem could shop for souvenirs and trade foreign currencies and the like. It's the Court of the Gentiles was a site where Jesus and the money changers. So the building of the temple, he employed a crew of 1,000 priests from Rome, Egypt, Greece to work on the temple. They finished the main building within 2 years, and work continued for another 80 years after that. The temple covered 35 acres and was more than 9 stories high. And it was destroyed in AD 70. Parts of it remain. The foundations now form what is part of the Wailing Wall, which is incredible as well. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up, Jesus said, and all the years that it took to put it together. Who starts a building and doesn't weigh the cost as well, Jesus said. Again, just some artist impressions of these, and then we'll just finish off really in the Gospels now. He was a megalomaniac, killed 2 sons born to Mariam, and that was due to rumours that his firstborn son instigated sort of conspiracies against these two sons. And at one stage, one of the sons, it's written in Josephus writes almost a full speech, and you can see father and son. He pleads for his life before his father, and apparently the whole Roman court all start crying. Herod starts crying, and he lets them off at that time. But because of the conspiracies gaining momentum through Antipater, eventually he does kill them. 5 days prior to his own death, he killed the son Antipater as well, and he was due to inherit the throne, but he was impatient in waiting, and he wanted his father apparently out of the way a little bit sooner. So Herod invited Antipater back to Judea and named him heir of the kingdom, and then executed him. Antipater apparently tried his father's plan of confronting him to prove his innocence, but there was a rumor that had gone around, and there was a potion that had come from, I think it was from Syria, and a servant. So Herod said, well, bring out someone, a condemned man. And he said, make him take this potion. It was supposed to be a love potion that Antipater had got for Herod. So his suspicion said, give it to the condemned man, and he died in front of them. So it was proven to be a poison, and then Antipater was then put to death. Herod always wanted to peel his own apple. If you want to remember any of this finer detail, he wouldn't let anyone do it for him due to his paranoia. I let Monica peel all my oranges and apples. I don't mind. Herod's reign was marked by discontent amongst the people. His reign wore on. He became more paranoid and began to suspect all the people around him. He orders executions of Mariam, her grandfather, her mother, her brother, the two sons he and Mariam shared, as well as his eldest son, Antipater, all on suspicion of infidelity and conspiracy. And then as we come through now, we'll just start bringing it to a close with, now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, there came wise men from the east saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? So you can just imagine how Herod's taking this King of the Jews, the one that's going to be a governor, the prophet, the king. And Herod, being Herod, he says, he's very sneaky, and he says, well, bring him to me, and I'd like to give him some gifts, just like his own son. Bring him to me, and I'll give him a few gifts. But you can't outsmart or deceive God. They were warned of God, and in a dream, that they should not return to Herod. They departed another way, and then Herod became furious. And also as well, we've got Joseph took Mary and Jesus and headed for Egypt. Herod then flew into a rage, and that's when he had all in Bethlehem, all the male children killed. And so that he was mocked of the wise men. And he's only mentioned in the Gospel in Matthew. He's not mentioned anywhere else. In medieval England, there's a day on the 28th of December. Maybe they should bring this one back in, not too sure. Day that Herod ordered the massacre of the innocents. And it was in England, the Christian church used to mark the terrible event. They celebrated it. It was called Childermas Day, or Holy Innocents' Day. And as part of the festivities, the parents would beat the children to remind them of the cruelty of King Herod. And you thought your presents were bad. There you go. Herod's death. Paranoid delusions, rage, artiliosis. His death in 4 BC came at the hands of a mysterious, agonizing illness which people are still looking into today. At one point, his pain was so excruciating that he tried to commit suicide. It's known in Judea today as Herod's evil. And he was quoted as saying, there comes a time in a king's life when he has to wonder, how will I be mourned? So being paranoid, he suspected his subjects hated him and that they would be cheering in the streets. So what he asked them to do was have a number of public figures put to death, so there'd be mourning in the land after his death. So he named a number of them, but his sons and his sister didn't carry out the wishes of Herod. 2007, his tomb was discovered where Josephus has said it would be. The tomb was empty, which is apparently a mystery as to where it was gone. Quite a bit of time has gone. According to Josephus, Herod's death came on the eve of Passover, and it was preceded by a lunar eclipse. There was also a sect called the Herodians who claimed Herod, not Jesus, was the Messiah. So last slide. So to many Christians, Herod, is a bloodthirsty villain of the Bible that we read in Matthew, the jealous despot who ordered the slaughter of newborn children throughout his kingdom following the birth of Jesus. To his subjects, he was Herod the Great, the paranoid tyrant who imposed oppressive taxes to fund his building projects and crushed all opposition. To Rome, he was little more than a reliable friend, wealthy puppet king. Throughout history, opinions of Herod the Great have not been particularly great in that sense. So after 400 years of so-called silence, we have the scene set. John the Baptist preparing the way. The King of Kings arrives, has been born, the Word made flesh, the Lamb of God, and we know what follows then: the death, the resurrection, the outpouring of the Holy Ghost, the evidence of speaking in other tongues. All that's to come. Next time, if you'll allow me back, will be who takes over at this stage with his sons, because his sons head off to Rome to plead to Rome. So that's where we leave it, really. The Roman Greek areas of influence, then they come back, and then the land is divided up as we get then into the times of Jesus as that backdrop. And then a quick note on AD 70 and something revolting to finish in about 130 AD. But I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time.